my entire world had been turned upside down. I remember my mom telling me that when there's a breakup, it's hard. But what happened to me was I woke up one day and the sky was black and the ground was orange and the clouds were purple, and it was as though everybody was like, what? This is how it's always been. And I was lost. My name is Meagan Snedigar. I am 28 years old. I was born and raised in Baton Rouge by my mother, who is a refugee from Nicaragua. She came here in 1979. And I got my first bachelor's from LSU in philosophy. And that's been something that I've always been very interested in. I also am a writer. I write in my spare time, whether it's about my dreams or about my feelings or about what happened that day, what have you. I write about it. I am a mother to one very mean, very ungrateful cat named Linus, and one very sweet, very special cat named Lemon. And I am also a dragon mom to Leopold, my bearded dragon. This fall, I am going to be going back to LSU to get my second bachelor's in social work. And I hope with that to go on to help women and children who have been sexually abused, traumatized, with their recovery. In 2012, I started dating somebody that I would go on to date for about 4 years, off and on. I thought I was in love with somebody who mirrored that same unconditional love that I had for them. We did have problems along the way, namely with infidelity and what I know now to be drugs and alcohol addiction on his part. There were a few times that we had broken up because of his infidelity during that 4-year time span. And every time he would be unfaithful, it would be turned around on me, and I would be insulted and made to feel guilty for not being enough sexually. It was almost as if he had a catalog of everything he perceived to be a physical or emotional flaw of mine, and he would consult this catalog only when he had done something wrong. I remember that he would often, very often, alarmingly so, would try to introduce new things into our sex life, things that I often was not comfortable with, but would agree to because I had been so insulted and I was afraid of losing this person. There were even things that I would do that I would find physically or emotionally painful for me, and instead of being cared for after doing them or trying them, I would be insulted and made to feel guilty that I wasn't doing enough to please my partner sexually. So I had effectively been ground down to a stump, an unrecognizable version of myself. I had lost all of my self-esteem. I hated looking in a mirror. I was so sad that I lost 20 pounds in the span of a couple months. And in case you can't tell because of the video, I don't have very much weight to lose. I was severely underweight. My hair began falling out. I started having panic attacks and rage-induced panic attacks, and I just hated myself. And I thought, man, this can't get any worse. Like, this can't get worse, can it? And then it did get worse. In February of 2016, on February 6th, I discovered that this person that I had been sharing my home and my body and my heart with had been both consensually soliciting sex from sex workers, but he had also been paying for trafficked women and underage girls in his spare time. When I asked him how long that had been happening, he told me it had been happening since he was 16 years old. So, since long before we started dating. And in one moment, I went from knowing this person in front of me to standing in front of a sex-addicted pedophile. That night, at the time, was when I thought that the abuse became physical, in that he began trying to physically intimidate me by throwing things at me and destroying things in our house, just ripping things off walls, and went into our bathroom and just destroyed it. And I watched in horror as this person who I no longer knew beat himself in the face and swear up and down that he was going to kill himself. And it was the worst night of my life. But it was also the night that I left forever and for good. And so in that sense, I do look back on it with some degree of fondness, in that I got away. I was effectively a paralyzed, traumatized mess for the rest of the year, probably. I never consented to sharing my body with a pedophile. I never consented to sharing a home with somebody who was having sex with multiple women a week, as well as raping girls and women in between having sex with me. So there's all these layers of, who this person really was, and it took me months to process, and I still am processing what close proximity I was in to someone who is so dangerous to women and to young girls, someone who is the demand for child porn industries, someone who is the demand for women being trafficked and sold into sex slavery. So I remember thinking, not only how did I get here, and, what happened along the way that I didn't realize that this was happening? How did I not identify the things he was saying to me as abuse? How do you sleep in the same bed with a pedophile and not know it? How do you date someone for 4 years who is a sex addict, who has cheated on you on multiple occasions, whose propensity for infidelity had up until that point been the hardest obstacle? I felt so violated. I felt so incredibly violated. I barely remember the next couple of months. I was absolutely paralyzed. I was afraid of strangers. I didn't trust anyone, but I didn't trust the most important person to trust, which is yourself. I didn't feel like I could accurately judge the character of the company I was keeping anymore. If somebody can be this deceitful while being so close to you for so long, then what was I missing in all of my other relationships? What am I missing when I meet that acquaintance? And, what concerns am I pushing down deep within myself because I'm like, that's not happening, you're crazy, I found myself, I wanted to die every single day. I didn't want to kill myself, but I wanted to be dead. I remember thinking that if that's what life was, I didn't want to be a part of it anymore. And I knew I needed help. I knew that wanting to disappear every day wasn't normal. I started reaching out to friends and, asking them, has this ever happened to you? Do you know anybody this has ever happened to? Do you know any resources? And most of them, or all of them, had never gone through anything like this. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew how to navigate what had happened to me. I didn't even know how to navigate that. How do you navigate that? I didn't feel like I had very many resources. A few friends came forward and suggested these certain hotlines, or a therapist that they had gone during times of trauma, or a therapist that they had seen. It seemed impossible to find anyone who would help me. I guess what happened to me was not what you would call a common narrative of sexual abuse, or at least that's how I was made to feel when I reached out to these people and was explained, always very kindly, but still, in essence, they couldn't help me. I wasn't a victim of violent rape or assault, and in that sense, I didn't qualify for a lot of help from anywhere from hotlines to therapists who specialized in trauma, and so I had given up. I stopped looking for anyone to understand what I had gone through. I stopped looking for help professionally until a coworker of mine, a very concerned coworker of mine, reached out or asked my permission to reach out to Star for me. Initially, Star expressed doubt as to being able to help me, and I wasn't surprised by that. They weren't the first people to do so, and a couple days after my friend reached out to them, they reached back out to my friend and said that they would and could help me. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that not only had all these people turned me down, but these same people who were unsure whether or not they could help me they had gotten together and discussed what had happened to me and decided, that they wanted to help me, that I had been sexually abused. It was it was such an enormous validation for me. And at the time, I needed that. I needed someone else to acknowledge that I had been sexually abused, because though I think my friends and family knew it, they were just aghast and didn't know how to communicate that with me. But Star, they believed me. They didn't just believe me, but my therapist at Star had actually worked with sex addicts before, and in that sense had knowledge that I absolutely did not have. And a lot of my therapy was specialized to my trauma. I attended Star from April of 2016 until October. And I remember on my last day, my therapist offered to let me release a balloon into the air. I wrote his name on the balloon, and we went outside, and I was so happy. I remember just having gone through therapy with people who understood what had happened to me and just how severe it had been and just how traumatizing it had been. I was so traumatized that I I don't remember a whole lot of those 6 months. I remember being very volatile, even to my therapist. I remember being very angry and not being the easiest client to work with. Oh, wow, I must have been a whole handful, or maybe two, because I just felt so alone, sometimes even with help. And when I started at Star, I hadn't gotten any help, and so I was on the defensive. I was ready for these people to be like, oh, never mind, we can't help you, or you're too difficult to deal with, we don't have the resources, or we don't understand. And of course that did not happen at all. I started feeling okay again. I didn't feel like myself, but at that point I had no idea who myself was. I had lost myself, so I couldn't feel like myself. I needed to go on to continue finding myself, and Star put me in a place where I could do that healthily. They helped me learn how to identify the things that were holding me back from recovery. One of the big lessons I learned there was to be nicer to myself. I remember a lot of people would always be like, are you ever going to forgive your abuser? Like, just forgive and forget and let it go, and all the things that people are tired of hearing when they are traumatized by somebody. And I would tell them that I don't need to forgive him. I need to forgive myself. I need to forgive myself for abandoning myself when I needed myself the most. I need to forgive myself for being so hard on myself after this happened to me and expecting me to be able to bounce back. And, I was self-deprecating. I was mean to myself because I didn't know any other way to be. And Star helped me figure that out and start on the right path to being nicer to myself. I think the biggest thing I would want people to take away from what happened to me is that when someone tells you how they've been sexually abused or sexually traumatized, that story isn't a puzzle piece for which to find a place among the spectrum of sexual violence. Our stories aren't supposed to fit into this spectrum. It's backwards. Our stories shape this spectrum. The spectrum is our story. The spectrum is ever widening, and we're ever defining it, and it's going to change, and it's going to be more inclusive the more people speak out about the things that they've experienced and the ways that they've been sexually abused. I encourage people to think outside that really tiny box that we've given survivors of sexual abuse. We're like, these are the narratives that determine whether or not you are a survivor of sexual or physical or emotional abuse. And if you don't have these, if you don't fit in this box, then you don't belong in it, and you are denied help, or you're denied validation, or you're denied a voice to tell your story. It seems so simple to just think about it. Think about how that would feel if that happened to you, and all of the nuances and the everyday life of something. I think that's what I would want people to know.